Before the applause faded, I thought it was proof that I was alive. For years, that sound followed me everywhere, roaring, relentless, intoxicating. It told me I was loved, wanted, needed. It filled every quiet corner before doubt could settle in. As long as people were clapping, I didn't have to listen to anything else. But applause is temporary. It always is. This story begins after the lights dimmed, after the crowd went home, after the echoes dissolved into empty air. It begins in the silence that came next, the silence that finally forced me to face a truth I had been avoiding my entire life. When the noise stopped, I realized something about myself, about fame, and about what had been missing all along. Stay with this story until the end, because what Whitney Houston discovered when the applause finally faded wasn't weakness, it was clarity. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful story. The applause didn't stop when I left the stage. It followed me down the narrow hallway, leaking through concrete walls and closed doors, echoing like something alive that refused to let go. I had learned to ride that sound for years. To let it lift me when my legs felt weak, to let it drown out questions I didn't want to answer. Applause was approval. Applause was safety. Applause meant I had done my job well enough to be forgiven for whatever I was hiding inside. That night, it felt different. My heels clicked against the floor as I walked toward my dressing room, smiles still fixed on my face because muscle memory didn't know how to stop. Crew members congratulated me as they passed. "Amazing tonight, Whit. You crushed it. They went crazy for you." I nodded. I thanked them. I played my part. But something inside me was already pulling away, like a tide receding before anyone notices the water is gone. When the door closed behind me, the noise dropped to a dull roar. I leaned back against the wall and let my shoulders fall. The silence inside that room was thick, almost aggressive. No music. No cues. No expectations, at least not the kind that came with lights and cameras. I stared at my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked exactly like Whitney Houston was supposed to look after a great show. Hair perfect. Makeup untouched. Eyes bright enough to convince anyone she was happy. I didn't recognize her. I sat down slowly, the adrenaline draining out of me all at once. My hands were shaking. Not from nerves, from the sudden absence of noise. I realized how much I relied on the sound of other people reacting to tell me who I was supposed to be. Without it, I felt exposed. I reached for a towel and wiped my face, smearing a little of the illusion away. Beneath it, there was fatigue I couldn't hide anymore. Not just physical, emotional. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long and pretending it's light. The applause outside swelled again, louder now. An encore chant. My name rising and falling in rhythm. Whitney. Whitney. I closed my eyes. There was a time when that sound felt like home. When it filled a place inside me that nothing else could reach. But tonight, instead of comfort, it stirred something else. Fear. Because I knew, deep down, that the applause wasn't for me. It was for the version of me they had memorized. The one who always delivered. The one who never cracked. The one who turned pain into performance so well that no one ever questioned the cost. A knock came at the door. 2 minutes, my manager said through the wood. They won't stop. They need you back out there. Need. That word settled into my chest and stayed there. I'll be right out, I said automatically. But I didn't move. I listened to the applause again, really listened this time. It wasn't love. It wasn't understanding. It was hunger. And I had been feeding it my whole life. What terrified me wasn't the idea of going back on stage. It was the thought of what would happen when the applause eventually faded for good. Who would I be then? I stood and walked toward the door, my hand hovering inches from the handle. The chant outside grew louder, almost desperate, as if they sensed my hesitation. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if I didn't answer it. And as my fingers touched the cold metal, a thought slipped into my mind. Quiet, dangerous, impossible to ignore. What if the applause had been drowning out the truth all along? The door felt heavier than it should have. I stood there longer than anyone outside realized, my hand resting on the handle, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The chant continued, rhythmic and insistent, as if the crowd believed volume alone could summon me back. I opened the door. The hallway flooded with sound immediately, applause crashing into me, voices shouting my name, the thump of bass still vibrating from the stage. My manager's face lit up with relief when he saw me. "There she is," he said, already turning to lead the way. "They're ready." Ready. Again that word. We walked together toward the stage entrance, the glow of the lights growing brighter with every step. I felt like I was moving on autopilot, my body trained to obey long before my mind could argue. "Just one more song," he said over the noise. "Give them what they want, and then we're done." I nodded, though something inside me tightened at the phrase, "what they want." I wondered, briefly, when anyone had last asked what I needed. The band launched into the intro before I even reached the wings. Cheers exploded. The sound was overwhelming, intoxicating in the way only a crowd that loves you can be. I stepped into the light. For a moment, instinct took over. I lifted the microphone. My voice found the melody effortlessly, soaring above the instruments like it always had. The crowd responded instantly, screams, claps, tears. I watched faces light up, watched people hold each other, watched my voice give them something real. And that was the problem. They felt something real. I felt hollow. As I sang, I scanned the audience, looking for myself in them. I used to find her there, reflected in their joy, their emotion, their release. Tonight, all I saw was distance. Thousands of people, connected to the sound, not the woman making it. I finished the song to thunderous applause. The sound hit harder than before, shaking the room. My manager beamed from the wings, mouthing thank you like I'd saved him from something terrible. I smiled. I bowed. I waved. And then, as the applause swelled, something inside me cracked. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It was quiet. A small realization slipping through the noise. This sound couldn't follow me forever. I lowered the microphone slightly, letting the band carry the final notes. The crowd kept clapping, louder now, sensing the end. I thought about the nights when I'd left stages like this one and returned to empty rooms. About how silence felt unbearable then, like proof that something was wrong with me. What if silence wasn't the enemy? What if it was trying to tell me something I'd been too busy to hear? I raised the microphone again. Not to sing. "Thank you," I said softly. The crowd quieted a little, expecting more. "I love you," I added. They roared back. But instead of feeding off it, I felt myself pulling away. For the first time, I imagined my life without this moment, without the lights, the chants, the validation that came in waves and vanished just as quickly. The thought scared me. It also relieved me. Backstage, as I walked off, the applause followed again, but it sounded distant now, like a memory instead of a promise. In my dressing room, I sat down and didn't turn on the lights. I let the darkness hold me. The applause outside faded slowly, dissolving into murmurs, then footsteps, then nothing. When the silence finally arrived, it wasn't empty. It was full of questions. And the loudest one whispered through the dark was this: if the applause stopped tomorrow, would I still know who I am? The silence didn't rush in all at once. It crept. At first, it was just the absence of noise outside my dressing room door, the applause dissolving into scattered footsteps, the echo of voices fading down the corridor. Then it became something heavier, settling into my chest, pressing against thoughts I had avoided for years. I stayed seated in the dark long after the building began to empty. I could have turned on the lights. I didn't. I wanted to feel the quiet exactly as it was, unfiltered, uncomfortable, honest. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. Once. Twice. Again. Messages from the same people who had cheered moments earlier, now asking about schedules, press, next appearances. The future being constructed in real time, without asking whether I wanted to step into it. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood and walked to the mirror. In the low light, my reflection was softer, less precise. Without the glare of stage lights, I looked like a woman who had been running for a long time and had finally slowed down enough to feel the ache. I leaned closer, searching my own eyes. "Who are you when no one's clapping?" I whispered. The question startled me. I had never asked it out loud before. Maybe because I was afraid of the answer. Or worse, afraid there might not be one. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. I was younger, not famous yet, standing in a small room, singing because I wanted to, not because anyone needed me to. I remembered the feeling, not applause, not validation, just joy. Pure and uncomplicated. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt that. A knock broke the stillness. "Whitney," a soft voice called. "You okay?" It was one of the backup singers. Someone who had shared stages with me for years, seen me up close without the illusion fully intact. "I'm fine," I said. The lie came easily. Too easily. She hesitated. "They're asking if you want to celebrate." "Everyone's waiting." "Celebrate." I looked around the room. At the costume draped over a chair. At the flowers already wilting. At the towels still damp from sweat. "I'll pass," I said finally. After she left, the quiet returned, deeper now, almost intentional. I sat back down, closing my eyes, letting the weight of the day settle into me. That's when I realized something unsettling. I didn't miss the applause. Not in that moment. Not the way I always had. Instead, I felt something else, grief. For the parts of myself I had postponed. For the conversations I had avoided. For the truth I had delayed because it didn't fit into a set list. The applause had always promised more love, more security, more meaning. But it never stayed long enough to deliver. Silence stayed. And in it, I could hear myself more clearly than I ever had on stage. My phone buzzed again. This time, I picked it up. A message from my manager. "We need to talk tomorrow. Big decisions." I stared at the words, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest. The sense that whatever I was realizing tonight would be challenged, questioned, possibly taken from me. I set the phone back down. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight belonged to me. I lay back on the couch and stared at the ceiling, listening to the building settle around me. Pipes humming. Distant doors closing. The sound of a world moving on. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was being left behind. I felt like I was being given a choice. But choices have consequences. I knew that. I had lived them long enough to recognize their weight. As I finally stood to leave, I felt a quiet resolve forming, fragile, but real. If the applause had been teaching me who to be, then the silence was about to teach me who I already was. And I wasn't sure the people who depended on my performance were ready for what I was beginning to understand. Morning arrived without ceremony. No alarms. No urgent knocks. Just pale light slipping through the curtains, touching the edges of a night I hadn't fully left behind. I woke slowly, as if my body needed proof that the quiet I'd chosen hadn't disappeared with sleep. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then memory returned. The empty venue, the unanswered messages, the decision to stay with myself instead of rushing back into the noise. I sat up, the weight of it all settling again, but this time it felt different. Less crushing. More clarifying. My phone lay face down on the table. I didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The city was already awake, moving with purpose, indifferent to what I had realized the night before. Cars passed. People walked. Somewhere, someone was singing, dreaming of stages and lights. I wondered if they knew what silence cost. Eventually, I turned the phone over. Missed calls. Messages. Concern disguised as logistics. Urgency wrapped in politeness. One message stood out, not because it was louder, but because it was quieter. "Just checking in. You don't have to be strong today." It was from my mother. I closed my eyes. She had always known when the performance ended and the truth began. Long before the world did. I called her. She answered on the first ring. "Hey, baby," she said, her voice steady, warm. "I was hoping you'd call." "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. The words came out before I could soften them.
She didn't rush to fix that.
That's okay, she said. Knowing that is a start. I told her about the night, about staying behind, about the strange relief of not being seen. I'm tired, I said finally. Not my voice. Me. There was a pause. Then, you've been tired a long time. We sat in that truth together. After we hung up, I got dressed simply, no stylist, no plan. I walked out into the city alone, feeling oddly exposed without an entourage, without a destination. Every step felt like a small rebellion against the version of me everyone expected. At a cafe, no one recognized me at first. I ordered coffee and sat by the window, watching steam rise from the cup. This was what normal felt like. Unremarkable, quiet,
Real.
but even here, the past followed. A man glanced at me, then did a double take. His eyes widened, excitement rushing in before caution could stop it. Are you? He began. I smiled gently. Just having coffee. He hesitated, nodded, and backed away. Respectful.
Kind.
The moment passed, and I realized something else. I didn't feel erased by not being acknowledged. I felt relieved. Later that afternoon, I met with my manager. The room was bright.
Too bright.
Papers spread across the table like evidence. He spoke quickly.
Tours.
Opportunities. A comeback narrative already forming. This is the moment, he said. People are ready for you again. I listened quietly, hands folded in my lap. What if I'm not ready for them? I asked. He blinked. Whitney, the audience. I know what the audience wants, I said calmly. I've known my whole life. The room went still. This isn't about numbers, I continued. It's about truth. And I don't know how to perform that without breaking something open. He leaned back, studying me like a puzzle that no longer fit its frame. You're talking about slowing down, he said. I'm talking about stopping, I replied. At least long enough to hear myself think. Silence filled the space between us. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that demands acknowledgement. Finally, he nodded. Not in agreement. In recognition. People won't understand, he said. I know, I answered. But I'm not sure I can survive being understood the wrong way anymore. When I left, the sky was turning gold. I stood outside, breathing deeply, feeling fear and freedom tangled together. The applause had faded, but something else was beginning. And for the first time, it felt like it belonged to me. The days that followed felt unfamiliar in the best and worst ways. Without a schedule built around rehearsals, interviews, and appearances, time stretched differently. Mornings no longer began with expectations waiting at the edge of the bed. Instead, they arrived quietly, asking nothing of me except presence. At first, the stillness was unsettling. I kept expecting guilt to show up, the voice that always whispered you should be doing more. But instead, something else surfaced. Memories. Not the polished kind replayed in documentaries, but small, unguarded moments I hadn't visited in years. I found myself humming in the kitchen, not for an audience, not even for practice. Just sound, soft and imperfect, floating through the air. When my voice cracked slightly, I didn't correct it. I let it be. That alone felt revolutionary. One afternoon, I drove without direction, windows down, radio off. The city unfolded around me in pieces, street corners, old theaters, places where my face once hung larger than life. I passed a venue where I had sold out nights in a row and felt no urge to stop. Instead, I kept going. I ended up at a small park, nearly empty. I sat on a bench and watched a group of children chase each other, laughing without restraint. Their joy was loud, messy, uncoordinated.
Real.
I wondered when joy had become something I had to schedule. A woman sat beside me after a while.
She didn't recognize me.
Or if she did, she chose not to show it. We shared the bench in silence until she spoke. Sometimes I come here when life feels too big, she said, staring ahead. I nodded. Does it help? She smiled faintly. It reminds me that the world keeps going, even when I stop. Her words settled deep. That night I wrote. Not lyrics meant for charts. Not confessions shaped to be palatable. Just truth, raw and uneven. Pages filled with sentences I never thought I'd allow myself to say out loud. I'm afraid my silence will disappoint them. I'm afraid my voice became my hiding place. I don't know who I am when no one is listening. I stopped only when my hand ached. Reading it back was painful but honest. And honesty, I was learning, didn't need to be beautiful to be powerful. The phone rang late. I almost didn't answer. It was an old friend from early days, before the awards, before the pressure calcified. We talked about nothing important at first. Then, everything. You don't sound different, she said eventually. You sound lighter. That word stayed with me after the call ended. Lighter didn't mean healed. It meant less burdened by pretending. The industry began to buzz, even without my participation. Speculation filled the gaps I'd left behind. Some called my silent strength. Others called it failure. I read none of it. Instead, I focused on small acts of reclaiming myself. Cooking meals I didn't rush through. Walking without sunglasses. Sitting with discomfort rather than drowning it in applause. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror and studied my reflection without judgment. No costumes. No stage makeup. Just a woman who had given everything and was learning how to receive herself back. I'm still here, I whispered. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Yet beneath the calm, something stirred. A knowing. This silence wasn't meant to last forever. It wasn't an escape. It was a recalibration. I didn't want to return to the stage as the version of me shaped by expectation. If I sang again, it would be because the truth demanded sound, not because the world demanded performance. That night, I placed the notebook beside my bed. Tomorrow, I thought I would decide what truth sounded like, and whether I was ready to let it be heard. The morning arrived without ceremony. No headlines. No ringing phones. Just light slipping through the curtains, gentle and unhurried. I lay still, listening to my own breathing, aware of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. The applause had faded, yes. But in its absence, a quieter sound had emerged. My own voice. Not the one trained to soar over orchestras or fill arenas. The inner voice I had silenced for years because it didn't fit neatly into melodies or expectations. I made coffee and sat by the window, notebook open in my lap. I reread the pages from the night before. The fear, the doubt, the honesty. None of it felt dramatic anymore. It felt necessary. For so long, truth had been something I filtered, softened so it wouldn't frighten people, reshaped so it wouldn't disrupt the image they loved. I had learned early that my role was to uplift, to inspire, to sound strong even when I wasn't. But strength, I was realizing, had been misunderstood. Strength wasn't endless endurance. It was knowing when to stop pretending. I thought about the little girl who once sang in church, eyes closed, not caring who listened. She hadn't chased perfection. She had chased feeling. Somewhere along the way, I had traded that freedom for approval. And approval, I finally understood, was a fragile foundation. Later that day, I received an invitation. A small one. Private. No cameras. No press. Just a room of people who wanted to listen, not to a performance but to a conversation. I stared at the message for a long time. This wasn't a comeback. It wasn't an obligation. It was a choice. That evening, I stood in front of a modest group. No dramatic entrance. No music swelling to announce me. Just a woman stepping into her own story. I didn't sing right away. I spoke. I told them about exhaustion disguised as success. About how applause can become a cage when it replaces connection. About the loneliness of being adored but not known. The room was silent. Not the tense silence of expectation, but the attentive kind. The kind that listens without trying to fix. When I finally sang, it wasn't planned.
No set list.
No rehearsal. Just a song that came out broken in places, softer than anyone expected. And yet, it felt fuller than anything I'd done in years. Afterward, no one rushed me. No one asked for more. They thanked me, not for the voice, but for the truth. Walking home that night, I felt something settle inside me. Peace, maybe. Or permission. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would return to the world that once defined me, or build something entirely new from quieter moments and honest sounds. But I knew this. I would never confuse applause with love again. I would never let silence mean disappearance. And I would never sing to hide. As I closed the door behind me, I looked around the room, the same walls, the same space, yet everything felt changed. Because I was changed. The world didn't need another perfect performance. It needed truth. And for the first time, I was no longer afraid of what would happen when people heard it. The applause had faded, but what remained was real. And that, finally, was enough.